When we construct a peak model, the peak model is typically designed using bell-shaped curves. And in this example we have a set of bell-shaped curves that fit the data and represent chemistry of carbon within the sample that is characteristic of graphene oxide. Similarly, we have a spectrum here that is mostly reduced graphene oxide, and the shape of these components are characteristic of the reduced graphene oxide. This third example is an example where we have a combination of graphene oxide and reduced graphene oxide. And while we have multiple peaks involved, in essence we have two different chemical states that we would like to highlight. So in this case, the graphene oxide has been indicated as a set of components that are associated with graphene oxide by a colour. In this case it's green. In the case of the reduced graphene oxide, we can see clearly the contribution of the reduced graphene oxide to this spectrum simply by using colours. So in this video I'm going to illustrate how colours can be assigned to these component peaks using the components property page. The example I will now use is a pair of spectra that have been fitted using a set of components. They are bell-shaped components for the most part. There are actually background components in the peak model also, but the idea is that we would like to indicate the different peaks that are related. In this case these are doublet peaks, so I want to relate doublet peaks together, and also a pair of peaks that represent loss structures. The components property page is the means by which a peak model is defined. And the definition of a peak model also includes not just the line shape or the position and area of these components, but also an entry that is the component index that ultimately can be used to define the colours that will be associated with these component peaks. The initial colours we see here are determined by the order of the components on this components property page. So the first colour is picked out of a colour palette based on position in the property page. An alternative way of choosing the colour is via the component index, and the component index picks out a very specific colour. Instead of simply relying on the order of the components here, it picks out for these two the same colour because they both are assigned the same component index. If I want to change the colour so that it reflects the component index, then if I right click over the name field, then the components are all coloured according to the component index, and they are also filled. So we can immediately see here the relationship between these doublet pairs. We've got two peaks here that are from the same photoemission process, just split in terms of spin orbit splitting, and therefore these are representative of zirconium 3p. The colours we see here are determined by a palette of colours, which we can see if we look at the synthetic component colours in this custom colour palette here. So these colours here represent a set of 16 colours that can be used to associate a colour with a specific component index. In this version of CasaXPS there's a new option that allows you to see the same component colour palette, and this time if you select a component with a component index of 0 in this case and click where it says component index, a dialog window appears, and this shows you the same palette of colours. It also shows you the colours and how they relate to how these components are coloured. In the current mode, the colour applies to the outline of a component, and then a faded colour is associated with that outline. So this is really a two-colour component, and we can see here in this palette how these two colours relate. So we've got an outline which represents the outside of this marker here, and the inner colour is marked internal to this circle. And this applies to each one of these colours that we see in the colour palette, that a component can be displayed either with a complete colour, as we see here when it is selected, or as this two-colour mode. Now I can change the colour of these two components because they're both assigned the component index of 0. If I right click here, then we get the color dialog window, which allows us to see what the current value is for the colors, and then we can modify the color by choosing a different one. So for example, I could choose blue and then perhaps make this a little bit less dark and then press OK. And because these are both assigned the same component index and the color associated with the component index has been changed from green to blue, we now see a different display for these components. The two-tone display of these components is dependent on an option on the colors property page of the tile display parameter dialog window, and it's this option here, fill one color. So if I tick this box and press apply, rather than seeing two colors, so the main color with a fade is now replaced by a single color that is the color that is specified for the outline. So this allows the adjustment of how components are displayed in terms of filling of the components.